I don't think I really need to give Andy much of an introduction, but as it's written in my notes that I ought to, as you will know, Andy Street has been our elected mayor, the first directly elected mayor of the West Midlands since May 2017. His term was due to end. His first term was due to end last May, but for obvious reasons, there were no elections last spring. So we're obviously now looking at who should be the mayor of the West Midlands from May of this year for what I presume will be a further 3-year term now. Now, the purpose of these Ask Andys, and Andy has been doing Ask Andy events really since before he was elected as mayor for the last 4 years. Normally they would be public meetings, whether it's in town halls, community centres or similar venues, and they're to provide the public with an opportunity to ask the mayor their questions, to get better understanding of what he's doing, and obviously for Andy also to hear for people's views, people's priorities in each part of the West Midlands region. Now, I don't need to tell you why we can't be doing public meetings at the moment, but Andy really wanted to have the meeting with people in Dudley South so that you could ask him his questions. So before I hand over to Andy, just a few points. The event's scheduled to last an hour. It is being recorded, so whilst it won't be going out live, there will be clips being used later for social media. Obviously, in practical terms, that means clips of me and Andy. Everyone else's questions are obviously going in through the text, so I'll be reading those out and Andy will be answering. But if there are any messages that do not get answered, please do get in touch. Please make sure that you send them through to the email addresses that the moderators have or will be providing in the chat function. I can't see whether it's appeared there yet, but I think that's all of the housekeeping out the way. So really just to say thanks for joining us, Andy. It's really big pleasure. Obviously you're in Dudley South very, very regularly. So I mean, it's great to have this opportunity to have this conversation with local people. And I don't think it'll surprise you as to what the biggest issue that's been coming in whilst we've been waiting has been, because you've obviously, you've joined me at Ridge Hill in the past. Obviously, we've spoken at some length about the importance of our precious greenbelt and what we need to do to protect it. Being on the edge of the West Midlands, particularly important for people in Dudley South. So let's start on that. What have you been doing and what are you going to do to help protect that greenbelt that is so important for people across Dudley South?
You're right, Mike. I have indeed been standing with you at Ridge Hill. You've been showing me the fields of Staffordshire in the distance, so definitely. Let me just say, first of all, though, my sincere apologies for being late. Let me just tell you very straight. It was a hustings event that was run for me. Competition with the other candidates. It overran and I just couldn't get off it. I am really sorry, though. I know it's very rude, so my apologies. But anyway, to answer your question head on, Mike, I've given a really clear commitment. I call it the Green Belt Pledge, that so long as I am mayor, there will be no need for any green belt around any of the boroughs in the Black Country, obviously including the land adjoining Dudley South, to be developed for housing, because we have more than enough brownfield sites for our housing need. And to be really clear about this, that does not mean I'm a NIMBY, that I'm denying the need to build houses. We've actually got a brilliant record on house building. We've doubled the number of homes being built over the last 5 years in the West Midlands. But the way we have done it is by concentrating on brownfield redevelopment. And that is right, because it's good for the communities that see themselves being redeveloped. Often there are sites that have been derelict for 30 years across the Black Country. We're bringing them back to life. But of course, it's also right, because once the green belt is gone, it is gone forever. And when we talk about the climate change emergency, the needing to invest in our natural environment, it just seems to me sheer folly to move to use that green belt in that way. So I couldn't be more categoric about it, Mike. I would stand with you defending the green belt adjacent to your western flank, you might call it.
And in terms of how we make sure that, that there's no need to build on greenbelt, what do you mean by brownfield first? What does that mean in practice? How can we make sure there are the homes that we recognise families need and demographics are changing? The local people are going to need somewhere affordable to live. How can we make sure that that happens within the West Midlands without having to spill out into this precious area?
Okay, so the way all of this works, and it's probably worth just explaining it because there can often be misunderstandings about this, is through what we call the local plan. And each of the councils in the Black Country have to produce a local plan. And so the nub of it is whether they allow in that local plan any green belt site to be identified and agreed in the plan to be brought forward. They have to achieve the number of homes that are likely to be needed in their local plan. So the way that we actually prevent it being needed is ensuring that there are sufficient homes able to be provided in the future on brownfield sites. And the contribution that I can make directly to that is to pick up one of the things that's flashing across in the chat. I am not the planning authority, that sticks with Dudley, but what I have been able to do is negotiate with central government a very substantial sum of money, over £450 million, which is then actually used to clean up derelict brownfield sites that have often lain idle for years and years. It's not in Dudley, but one that you'll all get immediately. Just this week, we've had the first cutting of the ground at Longbridge. That's been derelict for 15 years after the closure of the MG Rover factory. I got the cash from the government before Christmas to subsidise the development there, and we will build both homes and commercial properties there. So it's through having that investment fund to make places that otherwise wouldn't be developed, getting them developed, and that way it takes the pressure off the greenbelt, Mike. So that's the mechanism through which I can directly intervene in that. Hope that's clear.
Yeah, and obviously when people look at the housing need that we've got in Dudley, they may see conflicting figures, whether it's coming out of Dudley Council, whether it's coming out of the Black Country Plan, whether it's coming out of the combined authority as to just how many houses we're going to need locally. I mean, are you able to give some clarification as to where you see the level of need, so that you can be confident that we can meet that without going outside into greenbelt sites?
Yes, with pleasure. So again, the way this works is that every time the local plan is done, there is actually what's called a housing needs assessment done, which starts off actually with the population predictions from the Office of the National Statistics. So it's not, what I or an individual developer or an individual council might start with. There's actually a formula that is applied. But what you do have to do is exercise your judgment about how much of that need you think you can actually achieve in each area. So again, to make this really specific, if because of the investment that has come in to the centre of Dudley to build the Portersfield development, which was just agreed on Tuesday, and we can say there will be nearly 1,000 homes there, that is put into the calculation to meet that housing need. And it's on the back of all of those individual calculations that I said confidently last year, I do not believe that any green belt needs to be taken. So the thing I want to stress, it's not just a desire. It's built up from individual sites, what we think they can achieve to meet that technically calculated housing need assessment. And the obvious point is, the more ambitious you are with your brownfield reclamation, the more you put into that calculation and the more certain that you can be.
Okay, now I know there are obviously going to be a lot more questions coming in on greenbelt, on housing, on particularly around Ridge Hill Woods. I can see in the chat already. We will come back to those later under the public question. If I can just move the topics on just briefly onto other areas of investment and regeneration. We all know, obviously, the huge hit that that so many businesses and jobs have seen over the last 12 months. Never been more important time to make sure that we're getting the investment and regeneration we need within the West Midlands. What examples are we seeing in Dudley that will help us really to be leading the recovery once this pandemic is over, and might be work that needed to be done with or without COVID.
Yes, I would probably say that there was regeneration work that needed to be done without COVID in Dudley, actually, Mike. And but the things that I'm just going to list, my goodness, the timing is important, because as we all know, the regional economy has taken a terrible hit, and we need to bounce back. The calculations on this, just to be specific, is that we think we have lost 95,000 jobs over the region over the last year. So that's why we've put together a mayoral jobs plan to say in just 2 years, we're going to achieve at least 100,000 jobs, at least. If the economic rebound is good in the background, it will be more. So more than make up for what we've lost. And if we come specifically to Dudley, the regeneration that we've been able to bring in, let's just go through it. The catalyst for it all, of course, was the announcement that the metro was to be extended to Dudley. It's one of the first decisions that we took back in 2017, and that was just 6 months after I was elected. We got the funding from Philip Hammond in that autumn's budget. Remains the single biggest investment that Combined Authority has made, and it is in favour of Dudley. And we know now that the line is being dug, the funding is there, there's no debate about it. And if we just work along that line as it enters the centre of Dudley, we've obviously got the Institute of Technology being invested in. It's about £20 million, including some money from the Combined Authority. That's about the new cutting edge engineering skills that place will provide. Then we go next along the line to the Very Light Rail Innovation Centre, again, fully funded, footings in the ground for it. That's about new technology and new method of transport being designed and tested in Dudley. We then go over Castle Hill, and of course we now have the news, not yet fully funded, but it's the sign of confidence of what's coming, about the university campus. And of course, when we go the other side of the hill, we have the news now of the interchange station, and then of the Portersfield development, which the council are saying will have a new ice rink in it, a leisure facility, very original. So we see all of those investments coming together. Add together the total value, it's over £1 billion of investment in Dudley. And I don't think there'll be anyone on this call who will ever have been able to remember £1 billion of investment coming into Dudley. So I do feel there is a really practical plan, which is not Never Never Land fantasy. It is funded schemes that are coming.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember when I first stood for Parliament in Dudley South in 2015, and I was telling people, okay, if I'm elected, going to work to try and get that metro extension through Dudley, Netherton, obviously into Brierley Hill. I thought, yeah, people have been saying that for 30 years. It's never going to happen. And really, I mean, I think you were working on this long before you were mayor. Obviously, the support you were giving through the local enterprise partnership, the Birmingham Local Enterprise Partnership. So it's a big change. But I mean, transport is obviously a big issue for a lot of people in this part of the West Midlands. Obviously, our transport links vital both for business, but also for people to get around for pleasure, the social contact. What's your vision for improved transport, particularly for Dudley, but also more broadly for the wider West Midland region?
Yeah, so you're right, Mike. The biggest investment is the metro, and it does finish in Brierley Hill. I talked about central Dudley. I'm sure you will draw me back to your constituency. So I will definitely come back to that with pleasure. But let's take your broader question. So transport, people can say, oh, that's anarchy. But no, it's not. It's actually about how people lead their lives. And I'll just think about 3 things I think people will think about. For decades, this region has been held back because its public transport hasn't been good enough. We'll come to buses, I'm sure, and there's good investment there. But you have not, in Dudley, and particularly Dudley South, been connected to the national railway system or indeed any sort of tram system at all. So, and it holds places back economically because it doesn't bring investment in. It means that people can't move in for leisure. It means that people can't move easily, quickly out. So they want to go for an evening out in Birmingham. Difficult. And so it's how people lead their lives. And there's also a question of the expense and whether you end up as well having to use cars. Now, many people like doing that. but there's certainly a generation who would prefer not, because of the whole climate change issues around using public transport as opposed to the car. So for me, it was a critical issue to get well-costed, reliable, good quality public transport. We've talked about the metro, and the story is right, as Mike said. I wrote in my last manifesto, we will do this. And as I say, within 6 months, we had to bring the terminus to Brierley Hill, and I'm convinced that was the catalyst as well for the brilliant investment that you steered, Mike, the Future High Streets Fund investment for Brierley Hill, where we saw, I think it was £11 million coming to the centre of Brierley Hill there. So again, a catalyst. I'm also, if we take it to the very most practical point, I'm also pleased that uniquely in the country, we've had a bus fare freeze for 4 years. We had a situation where we got a terrible circle of deteriorating services, increasing prices, lower patronage, deteriorating services, and on it went. First time I became mayor with my business background, I sat down with the managing director of National Express and said, we've got to turn that round. We now have increasing patronage, lower fares, and you've seen the investment in new vehicles as well, those wonderful new platinum buses, which are steadily being rolled out across the conurbation. And the result, we've got increasing ridership on trains, on metro, and on buses, and we are unique in the country to have done that. So I think we've made a decent start. There's an enormous amount more to be done, and lots more innovative ideas, like the sort of trial we've just started, where you'll be ordering the bus on your app, for example, where we'll have the capping between all the different modes and we get ticketing even cheaper. So lots more to come, but I genuinely think we've made a good start, Mike.
Yeah, and of course, better transport links, not just about making sure that we can have a night out in Birmingham, it's obviously giving people in Birmingham the opportunity for a night out in Brierley Hill as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, people will be all too familiar with the changes, not all of them, or probably very few of them, seen as positive in high streets over probably the last half a century. The move away from town centres, the impact that that's having on our high streets. What role do you see for our high streets and town centres? What can we do, as someone with such a strong retail background, do you think, to breathe more life into our town centres, to make them places where people want to be, where they feel safe, and they can be the heart of our communities?
Yes, it's a fascinating question, Mike. And the answer, of course, is not the same for the different town centres. So let's just explain what I mean by that. You've got some incredibly strong local high streets. I think of Kings Winford as probably the best example, actually. It's still got its banks, I think, unless anything's changed in the last few weeks. Mike's looking, is he right? I think I am. But anyway, everyone would acknowledge that it's a strong high street. And the answer there, in a relatively affluent local place, is very different to, let's say, Dudley Town Centre or Brierley Hill, which of course has got underlying challenges with the adjacency of Maryhill. And I do think there's a real point in places like Kings Winford about the local. And we've actually seen on the back of the pandemic, people wanting to stay local. So actually, I'm a huge believer in local businesses, probably new businesses coming in as well. There does need to be reform of the business rate system. I was really pleased that there's been an extension to the business rates holiday, the VAT holidays as well. That's very important. And of course, the local council plays a critical role there as well, just with its car parking regime charges as well, just to make it easy for people. And of course, all the piece about how good the public areas are. If you then move to the bigger high streets, like Brierley Hill, though, you do need to think differently, because they are undergoing huge change with obviously the internet coming, as we say. So the reason I called out your work on the Future High Streets Fund is I think it's genuinely thinking about the big picture pieces. And some of the pieces I would put into that mix, we're going to need more people to live in our town centres. Some change of use of buildings for actually to be living in. That is the right thing to do. We're going to need definitely to see more startup spaces there. That's, again, people want to be local for their new businesses. We probably need more public services on the high street, actually. We need definitely to be better connected to public transport. That brilliant proposal, as we've already talked about, to link the high street to the metro terminus in Brierley Hill. So there are definitely things we can do to support our high streets, whether they be financial, whether they be practical, whether they be some change of use, because I still believe they're going to be the focal point of communities. And that's exactly what we're trying to do in supporting all the Towns Funds bids, for example, that are coming from Dudley Council next.
Clearly, for much of the last 12 months, a lot of our economy has been largely shut down because of this global pandemic. So local economy really has been struggling in a way that I don't think many of us have seen in the past. If we're looking to get back onto our feet to create those jobs, we need to be focusing more intensely on jobs, skills and investment than I think ever before. So what action have you been taking? What action do you intend to take really to make sure that we have the right quality jobs, that people have got the skills that they need, and that as a result we're able to bring even more investment into the area?
Yes. So you rightly ask about the last 12 months, but just to give your listeners confidence, we should probably just think, what can we learn from what was happening before the pandemic, actually, where I hope people would say the story was a really encouraging one. We'd actually achieved 97,000 more jobs across the West Midlands in 3 years. That was pretty good going growth. Actually, we got record employment percentages, and we'd actually got inward investment from around the world that was actually growing that job number all the time. And some of the sectors, our digital sector, our construction sector, construction was actually the fastest growing sector. And I call that out again as a clue to the future. So we were doing really well. It's obviously been knocked horribly. And it's why I said earlier on, we have this clear plan for 100,000 new jobs going forward. And there's probably just 3 ingredients I would call out in that. The first thing I've been doing is shouting up to protect existing jobs, because anybody will know on the line, protect what you've got before you think about the new. So take the hospitality industry, for example. It was me, when we first moved into the tiering arrangements in the autumn, who was actually saying to the Chancellor, you haven't put the support in place to go alongside the health crisis. And he was good enough to say on the floor of the House of Commons a week later, when he put support for hospitality in place, and he was vocal and he was right. So shouting up for our existing businesses when need be, just as I did before the last budget, is critical. The second thing, of course, is getting behind the big new creators of jobs of the future. So whether it be, and some might disagree with me about actually the decision, but it's been taken, HS2, making sure those jobs come to local SMEs in the West Midlands. So I'll give you a classic example. We ran a session for 750 SMEs based up in the Black Country in Bilston, actually, to actually make sure as many of them could get the contracts in what is Europe's biggest infrastructure investment. And then there's thinking of the new sectors. So take something like life sciences. Jobs are coming there very rapidly. And of course, if you think of what we've just had announced in Selly Oak, a little way from your patch, 200 million of investment there in that new sector. And I was there lobbying to get that investment in. But then the last part of the answer, Mike, is about training people for the jobs of the future. And there I would have to call out Dudley College as an exemplary example. So we were part of the bid, have part funded the new Institute of Technology College. It will give that brilliant training in engineering and advanced manufacturing skills. And through all the work we're doing around what we call our sector-based work academies, it's a bit of jargon, but what it really is 10,000 opportunities for young people to get jobs through the training with our colleges in the sectors that are growing. So again, at Dudley College, what we did around the construction gateway, getting young people the training in construction skills so they could move straight into jobs. So lots of practical examples of reskilling like that, Mike.
I'm really pleased to hear you obviously talking so passionately as you have for years about hospitality. As you know,
oh yes,
one of the areas that I work particularly hard on in Parliament is around our community pubs, also our microbreweries, as chair of the all-party parliamentary group on beer and brewing. Now, our community pubs are often really are right at the heart of our communities. Pubs, like any businesses, sometimes close, but I think what's particularly galling to local communities is when you see successful, popular pubs being sold off for housing, or when you see pubs just closing for no obvious reason and then standing derelict at the heart of our towns for what feels like ages with nothing being done to it. And what do you think that you, the West Midlands Combined Authority, can do to help communities to save those pubs that they really, really value and don't want to see die?
So it's a very timely question, Mike, because we've just put out a statement today on exactly this subject, I'm pleased to say. And it has been gnawing away at me. I was the chap. I was the chap on the 10 o'clock news in October in a bar talking about how important this was to this industry is to economic futures, but also they are right at the heart of communities. And you see that particularly in the wet pubs across the Black Country, actually. And I know you are a champion of this in Parliament. So the straight answer to your question, Mike, is we've announced today that we are partnering, this is the combined authority, with a national charity that's actually called the Plunkett Foundation. You might not have heard it, but it exists to help advise community groups who may wish to take on a struggling pub. This foundation advises the community on what they need to do to make a real success of it. And I'm pleased to say, as part of our community recovery funding, we've put money into the Plunkett Foundation, and then we'll select one pub in each borough to get that practical advice from the Plunkett Foundation. And hopefully, of course, once there is one, there will be others in each borough. And the reason the foundation wanted to work with us, and I think this is an interesting reflection, is they have lots of community pubs in the leafy shires that have done this. They have very few in the urban areas. And so actually there was a sort of marriage here where we said, this really matters to our communities. They're the heart of the Black Country communities. And they said, we want to do a much better job in urban communities on saving our pubs. So yeah, that programme has gone live today with a lovely picture of me having a pint. It's in a pub in Walsall, actually, not in Dudley, Mike. I hope you'll forgive me. But it's in the Black Country Arms, as it's called, in Walsall. And I hope that local community groups will take up this offer and some real good can come from it.
That's great to hear. I hope it's not too long before you and I can visit a few of the pubs in Dudley South to see
Exactly.
the contribution that they're making to the community as well. I mean, I've seen a couple of these community-run pubs work really, really well. I've seen them, as you say, in leafy shires like Staffordshire, but I've also seen in Tottenham some really urban areas where these can be very, very successful. If we can move across to a few of the questions that have been flooding in on the
yes, please.
Q&A. As we predicted, a lot of these are on that on the greenbelt issues around housing and development. And Trisha's asking, how do you think that the conflict can be managed between local communities and developers across the region so that we can make sure that local people do have a fundamental right and a role in directly shaping what happens in their local areas? And she says, in terms of direct engagement rather than just asynchronous and virtual consultation.
I actually don't think there is a conflict, actually. But it depends. But let me take your question in two ways. The underlying point, there is no conflict. I honestly believe that communities on the, I'll call it the edge of the Black Country, agree with the position that your MP and I am taking on this, actually. And we can't have sat down with every individual voter in Dudley, of course not. But we have had a lot of correspondence with a lot of community groups. And I am absolutely certain the overwhelming opinion is on our side on this. So I'm confident of that. And I think our ears are close enough to the ground to make that judgment, actually. If what you mean by the question, though, is how do you make sure that the consultation on the local plan is genuine? I accept that's a fair question. And I do know that there's very clear legal requirements that when a council puts that plan together and we can see what is proposed for each individual site, and that will come in the Black Country in the next 2 or 3 years, then when that happens, we will definitely need to make sure that there is genuine consultation at that point. But Trish, I'm sorry to be robust, but I actually think that I think there is agreement to the stance that we've taken, actually.
And really building on that point, we've had a number of questions all asking how much influence and sway do you feel that you have over decisions that are taken by really South Staffordshire Council that are the other sides of the border. And how can you have input in that? And obviously through you, how can local residents have an input in those decisions?
Yeah. So I think there's two ways. The longer term way is, of course, if we do manage to redevelop more of our brownfield lands, what we require of neighbouring areas is less. That is obviously true. And there's, so that's a very real influence, but it takes a little longer. But you are right in the question to say that ultimately the planning, the local plan for South Staffordshire is their proposal. But I think we have been influential through actually putting it bluntly, making a lot of noise. So we know the proposals that there are, frankly, all the way along the west side of Dudley, right down from Starbridge up past Ridge Hill, as Mike said, and indeed right up into the Straits and then on to Sedgley and the Seven Cornfields almost into Wolverhampton. So I think the South Staffordshire have really understood the strength of feeling that there is. And I like to think that I, with all the MPs along the boundary, have actually brought that out in a really forceful way. And they are clearly being very much more thoughtful about their proposals than they would have been had we, frankly, not taken the stance that we have. But the question is right. Ultimately, it's a South Staffordshire decision, but we have to make our voices heard very loudly.
Great. And as we said, you've been with me to Ridge Hill. You've seen, obviously, the woods as they were. There has been a lot of tree clearance, particularly over the last few weeks, but going back over a few months. And there are a lot of people asking in the questions whether you'll come back again and have a look and see what it is now, and look to see what you think needs to be done, how we can make sure that the local area does remain as a green wooded space.
Yeah, I would love to come back again, Mike, in front of however many witnesses there are. I'm very happy to say that. And let me just again give you an illustration of how robust we have to be about this. Again, not your part of the conurbation, because we're not at this stage with your part of the conurbation, but in Coventry, where they are much further down this process of a new local plan and giving consents in the greenbelt. I've gone as far as asking the Secretary of State to review those consents. So I am prepared to stand up and be counted on this, because I genuinely believe that it's right. And the thing that I keep thinking about, just think about the economics of a developer. If you allow a developer to build lovely homes in a greenfield site, they will make a very positive return on that on the west side of Dudley at the moment. If you encourage them to do some much more difficult things, which are actually much more sustainable on, let's call them, biggest brownfield site in the West Midlands that we're dealing with, in the Black Country that we're dealing with at the moment, the old Severn Trent sewage works in Friar Park in Sandwell, it's much more challenging. They are not going to make as easy money there, but we have got to encourage them to deal with those areas. Otherwise, you just stay with a huge blight on the landscape right in the middle of the conurbation. So that's, again, why I'm determined to tough this one out.
And I'm finally on the Ridge Hill and greenbelt matters for a moment. Obviously, all the discussion so far we've had this evening has really been talking about housing, but presumably the same would go in terms of protecting the greenbelt for commercial development, for whether it's office, whether it's industrial sites. Yes. Are you confident that we have enough of those sites available in the West Midlands as well?
It's a really, really interesting question, this, Mike, because you can't do the maths in quite the predictable way that I described early on. For add each site up, what it's going to do, does it eat the total number? Because you then get a massive development that maybe you'd not anticipated, and of course you want to accommodate, and it's difficult. But I think I'd call out two pieces of evidence that lead me to stick to our approach. First, we are bringing to market some really difficult brownfield commercial sites. Now, unless Mike corrects me, there isn't a mega one in Dudley South, so I think I can say this, but there are in other parts. We mentioned Longbridge earlier on, sat derelict. That is big enough for 900,000 square foot of commercial use. And it's been ignored for 16 years. We've just made it happen. Phoenix 10, just on the M6 between Sandwell and Walsall. That is probably the most polluted place in Britain, an old copper works. Terrible things happen there. It is about 32 football pitches big, and that too is now being cleaned up thanks to money from the combined authority and will come back into use. And interestingly, when we needed the gigafactory, huge factory for the future of the future of electric vehicles, and people said, "You won't have a site, Andy." That was the thing that was sort of thrown at us by other parts of the country. Oh yes, we found a site, Coventry Airport, and it will serve the whole of the conurbation because every black country automotive manufacturer has a stake in that in the future. But we found it. So the market would tell us that actually everything we've needed to find over the last 4 years, we have been able to do so if we drive ingenuity. And it's sort of my point, it's slightly the point I previously made in a slightly different way. If we say we can't we find the easy way out, we just tar over the greenbelt, that's what we'll do. If we say we're going to find solutions to this, we will.
Thanks, Andy. And moving on to jobs and skills, how do you see the government's kickstart scheme? I mean, obviously this is being modified quite drastically at the moment, but how do you see it benefiting young people here, in King Swinford, Brierley Hill, across Dudley South, and the wider area?
I think it's critical to young people in your patch, Mike. Let's just give the numbers, and you'll apologise if I have the numbers for the West Midlands. Mike will tell you exactly what the numbers are for his constituency, but I can't carry 28 constituent numbers in my head. We have 42,000 youngsters up to 24 who are not working at the moment. It's doubled in a year. That's the scale of what we're facing. Kickstart, the commitment from the government is the funding for 20,000 places in the West Midlands. So actually it is a very substantial attack on that problem. And we have, I had this number oddly enough only today, Mike, we have 7,000 vacancies currently on offer for that scheme across the West Midlands. So I think it is actually a very important part of our attack. And I'm going to tell you something I'd like to do with it, though. It's going to be great experience, government picking up the bill, but I actually want to link it with apprenticeships, because what I'm slightly worried about in the design of Kickstart is you could do it and then that's the end of it. I would much prefer it then led to a paid apprenticeship, and I don't think it's beyond the wit of man to design a bridge from one to the other in an existing employer. So I hope we'll actually develop it further and make it more meaningful in its impact, but actually just in pure offers on the table at the moment. There are about 7,000 vacancies across the West Midlands, so very important.
I mean, that's extremely positive proposal. I mean, obviously we have some incredible opportunities through apprenticeship, some of the career paths available now that, well, if they're available when I was leaving school and college, I certainly wasn't aware of them, but I don't think they were in quite the same way. But what have you been doing more broadly around apprenticeships and that kind of opportunity for school and college leavers to be developing their careers without necessarily needing to go to university?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually, Mike. So let me talk about the general approach to it. Then I'll give you one or two really specific examples, which I think people will be inspired by, I hope. So one of the critical roles that we have is to try to work out what's the future jobs in the West Midlands economy and how we're going to train people in the right things so they can have a brilliant future in those areas. So what we actually do is we have our regional economic plan, and we say broadly there might be this 100,000 jobs in digital, this 100,000 jobs in healthcare, this 100,000 jobs in advanced manufacturing. And then we work with our colleges to ensure that the curriculums that they have are actually delivering those programs. And we have particular responsibility for our adult education budget, and to make sure that the right things are being trained. That's the mega picture. But if we just come again to how we're doing this right now for the crisis, and I'll go back to young people again, we've set up what we call these work academies with all of our colleges, and if anyone wants to, they can go online, see the prospectus for it. And again, it's making sure that in your case, Dudley College is providing exactly the courses in the growth areas. So we set up at the Brierley Hill, a campus of Dudley College, a wonderful construction gateway facility where actually we did basic training in plant maintenance, plant as in vehicles and all things you use on a building site. Brilliant, practical things to give people work. An example that I think is really innovative, it's actually from Wolverhampton, I'm sorry, but young people from Dudley can go on the metro up to it in the future. We've set up a new facility there, training people in electrical vehicle maintenance. Thinks vehicles are going to be electric in the future. Hardly any of our mechanics have the right experience. 720 places just agreed in that course there. And another example, link it to Brexit. So many jobs, the most vacancies in the region at the moment in anything are in health and social care jobs, particularly as we can't bring people in from Europe as we used to for some of those jobs. So we're working with our colleges and actually Wolverhampton University, Birmingham City University on programs there. So I hope what comes out of that, Mike, is we're thinking really practically about what are the training programs to get people into the jobs of the future. And it is, well, again, pre-pandemic, that approach really was working.
Thanks, Andy. Hopefully that answers Sue's question. But I see another from Trish asking what your observations are on the closure of Starbridge College, obviously formerly BMet.
Yeah.
And what are future plans for developing high quality further education opportunities and provisions? Now, Trish says in the Starbridge area, but if I can take the my prerogative to broaden that out across Dudley
yeah.
and Black Country as well.
Yes, of course. So this, I'll be honest with you, Trish, this was difficult. This was one of the challenging things that came across my desk as mayor. And to be really clear, it was not my decision. It was the board of the BMet College, as you imply. But I hope, and for Starbridge to lose its own college was disappointing. But of course, as we know, they did at least keep their facilities in Brierley Hill, which was very important to Mike, and he and I spoke about it at the time, and it was important to lobby for that. But what I particularly wanted to make sure was that all of those students who had previously gone to Starbridge College were given alternative provision either in Dudley or in Halesowen. And we actually controlled some of the funding for that, and we only released that funding once we were absolutely certain that that alternative provision was in place. And the feedback I've had, harsh as it is for Starbridge, is that actually that was done well in the end to give that alternative provision. The other thing I was influential in was actually thinking about who might take on the building so that it actually does continue to provide education in the town of Starbridge. And I think you will know the progress that's been made, or hopefully will be made, with OSH in the future for that. So that was, again, something I actively stepped into to make sure that happened. But on the wider point, I think it's only right that we call out the huge success of Dudley College and actually Halesowen College. If you're from Starbridge, Trish, it's a very high performing institution. I've been lucky enough to go along to lots of the award ceremonies there over recent years. But Dudley College, particularly progressive in terms of how they've embraced this whole Institute of Technology piece. It's being built. We actually took the Prime Minister there back in the summer. And actually it will be one of only 12 places in the UK. We won the competition. We've put a little bit of money in directly from the CA, but we won the competition for government funding, and it will be literally cutting edge provision for youngsters in Dudley. Again, by the way, critical why the public transport is brilliant in Dudley to get people to these new assets. So that's how we've tried to approach the Starbridge College challenge, Trish.
Thanks. Now, quick transport question from Roger Davis asking, well, he asked what the combined authority position, but perhaps in terms of your position, is on the restoration of the missing rail link between Starbridge and Brierley Hill. I have a feeling I know the answer to this one, having discussed this with you on
yes.
occasions. But
yes, okay. brilliant question. So it's the obvious missing link, isn't it? That you'll be able to come down from Wednesbury to Brierley Hill on the metro, but then Starbridge will be within touching distance for oh so far. So we have done our, it sounds a bit bureaucratic, this answer, but we've got to fix a link. The question is, what link is it going to be? So we've done our feasibility study as to how it, what could actually be funded for it. And the straight answer is, there is not going to be we do not believe at the moment that it will be a metro extension, because you obviously need pretty heavy demand to pay for that capital investment. So we're actually looking for a light rail extension. And one of the commitments I will make in my manifesto is we do sort this out in the next term, just as I committed to the Wednesbury to Brierley Hill extension in the last one. And of course, it's interesting in Starbridge because they already have the Starbridge shuttle that works extremely well, a unique light rail format there. And I was actually down on Starbridge Junction Station about 4 weeks ago, I think it was, looking at one of the bids that we're making into central government at the moment for funding to restore that link with a light rail solution. So yeah, right question. And we know we've got to come good on it.
And how do you think you tackle the issue of, obviously, if someone's coming from Hagley to Starbridge by train, Starbridge to Brierley Hill by light rail, and then getting a third mode of transport to continue the metro? How do you stop that becoming a fragmented network?
Yeah, of course, there's two answers. Of course, you have to have interoperability of your ticketing, and we, as I said, we will get to capping. So you use your debit card or credit card, nothing more common, or a Swift card, and you have the cap, so that all is one through ticket maximized. And of course, you have to have very good timetabling when you've got that situation. Now, what Mike's nudging me on is, I know Mike would dearly like the metro to be extended south of Brierley Hill, and so would I, for the reason that Mike says. But we do have to be realistic about the cost. It's 420 million, the cost of bringing it all the way from Wednesbury, and it's going to be very, very hard to make the business case. And that's why, made in Dudley, we're trying to research these less expensive formats. And of course, there is an advantage of that. If we get that right, we don't just have to limit it to the Starbridge to a Brierley Hill link. We can think about other links as well. And of course, the obvious place to think about in that respect is Russell's Hall Hospital.
And go back to high streets and particularly, obviously, retail. What do you think can be done about business rate reform to support our high streets over perhaps digital online sellers?
Yeah, so great question, Mike. So this is another area where I can challenge the government. I mean, the lovely thing about doing this job is I am proud to be a Conservative, stand by it, but I'm not whipped by the government in London. Mike, of course, is, and he's very careful with that, of course, thinks exactly when he wishes to support the government and when he might not. But the nice thing for me is that I'm not, in a sense, whipped by anybody. So this is an area I do feel very strongly on, given my previous background, that business rates currently disadvantage high street retailers. By the way, they also disadvantage huge manufacturers who use space as well. And they advantage new forms of business that use the internet. So, I mean, it couldn't be clearer that there's an imbalance and there needs to be a radical overhaul of business rates. I sense the government know this. It's why they keep giving business rates exemptions. It's sort of an admission that the system doesn't work, but we need to push them to a full reform. I've been down, done the Treasury Select Committee, lobbied the Chancellor directly, but at the moment, I haven't got cut through, but I know we're going to need to continue.
And I think the Chancellor would tell you that there's not a lot of difference between yourself and my views on that. Now, Jay Singh Sohal, who, as you know, standing for Police Crime Commissioner,
yes,
has also put in, since the closure of Dudley Police Station by the Labour PCC in 2017, we've seen crime rise. He's campaigning to get more police officers out on the streets. Will you continue to speak to the current PCC on behalf of concerned residents about the need for a strong local police presence in the area to tackle rising crime?
So the answer is, it's nice when there's a question I can give a one-word answer to, Mike. Yes is the answer. And let's be really clear what's at stake here. The two Labour Police and Crime Commissioners have closed 44 local police stations in the 9 years in which they've been in post. 44 police stations. I mean, it's incredible, really, when you think about it. And they say, oh, it doesn't matter. The police don't need that local presence. I totally disagree. Good policing starts locally, and it starts with a presence in a place that people can relate to. And so I'm fully behind Jay's effort to stop dead in their tracks any further police station closures. Couldn't be clearer. And to answer Jay's question head on, I have had this out with the current Labour Police and Crime Commissioner. The critical point, though, is that he will no longer be commissioner. He's not standing again. And on the 6th of May, we have to decide on a new commissioner. And the choice is really very clear between Jay, who will invest in local policing, stop any further closures, and a new Labour commissioner who is from Birmingham and will continue the over-centralisation of the force in central Birmingham.
And another question that's come in. Obviously, don't have powers over policing, but one question here said, we hear that 1 in 40 young women are sexually assaulted each year. Obviously, we've seen the horrific murder of Sarah Everard in London.
Yeah.
What do you think can be done to make our streets in the West Midlands safer, better lit, and more frequently patrolled?
So let me tell you what I've done where I do have responsibility, because I think you'll then get the idea of what type of person I am and how I would deal with this if I was standing Police and Crime Commissioner, which I'm not. So I do have responsibility for crime on transport. It's a shared responsibility with the Police and Crime Commissioner, and we deliver it through what we call the Safer Travel Partnership. And the facts are that crime on the public transport network in the West Midlands has fallen dramatically in the last decade and has continued to fall in the last 3 years. And the way we've done that is a combination of two things. Number one, we have an active police force, the Safer Travel Police, whose job it is to be out and patrol the transport network. They literally ride the buses. And by the way, they know which routes are the most dangerous for everybody, including women. They ride the trains. They're a physical presence. And we've invested in further resources, particularly increasing the number of special constables, which our PCC for the whole region has not done as much as he could have done. And we've also invested in technology. Every one of our vehicles now on any of our public transport modes, rail, bus, tram, is linked directly back to a control centre here. It's a newly built control centre. And our trams are now linked by 5G, which means the quality of the image and the speed by which it is relayed back to the centre is the best anywhere in Britain. So it means that we can respond to incidents incredibly quickly. And that all of our tram drivers and conductors, for example, are immediate contact with their own control centres, as are our rail and bus drivers as well. So that is the practical thing, the mix of physical and technology to bring crime down on the transport network. And it is and has and is working.
Having visited that safety control centre, I think our public transport must be just about the safest places imaginable in the West Midlands. If we could just squeeze in two very short and quick questions, as we obviously started a little. Of
course you can, Mike.
Whether we can take advantage of you. Firstly, from Sean asking how important you think that the Black Country Living Museum is in promoting Dudley and the wider Black Country.
Ah, brilliant. Gives me a perfect opportunity to perhaps slightly correct my line over the metro when you pulled me up and said you can go for a night out in Birmingham. You can go for a day out in Dudley as well. Oh, it's critical. I mean, it's a wonderful jewel, I would describe it as. And it was, of course, brilliant that the government gave it very good support through the Cultural Recovery Fund. And it's brilliant that it got its, I think, £10 million for its, what do they call it? The Forging Ahead programme. But I think its visitor numbers about 500,000 per year already. So an incredible asset. Think of the spending that brings in. And it is unique. And I suspect that every school child in the Black Country should go as well for a day. So I can't really find the words to do it justice, but so important. And it is right, again, that tourists will be able to be brought into Dudley, not just for that, but for the castle and for the zoo on the new public transport that we're investing in.
As well as the work, obviously, they do with our important creative industries in the West Midlands, which is massive growth industry for economically, skills, jobs, the whole range.
You are spot on. And of course, it's lovely. I have actually been on the set. I don't know if they gave you the same privilege, Mike, but I was so privileged to go on the set of Peaky Blinders, which is filmed, of course, at the Black Country Living Museum. But it's a good day to mention that because, of course, colleagues might have seen that we've had some brilliant news for the region today about the BBC reinvesting in the West Midlands. I mean, this has been a long saga. It's one I've had a number of goes at different Director Generals at. But today, the new Director General, Tim Davey, who I first started negotiating this with before Christmas, has announced really very substantial investment. It's obviously Birmingham in this case, but it's jobs for the whole region, about making drama here, making entertainment programs here, doing a lot of their training and development here, the news beat function being relocated from London to here, the BBC Asia network fully relocated here. I mean, it is definitely the best day for BBC investment in the West Midlands since Pebble Mill closed. So it's a nice thing to have been able to deliver. Brilliant.
And finally, and I think it was the very first question that was submitted tonight, it's from Lorraine Northway, and it's, if the Andy Street of today could give the younger version of himself a piece of advice, what would that advice be?
It would be follow your heart, not your head. Now, that might sound a ridiculous thing to say, but I've learned in life that you will be your best at the things you really enjoy and cherish. And sometimes when you're a youngster, you have all this sort of very sage advice telling you, what you should do. But actually, it's I've learned, and I've been very lucky because twice in my life I found it. And people might say you found it in work. I mean, you can say you do it in relationships as well. But if you find things where you genuinely are very happy and stimulated and challenged and all that, then you'll probably give of your best. So try to find that and don't worry too much about the very earnest and serious advice you might be getting at the same time.
Fantastic. And thank you, Andy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. I'm told this is one of the largest of these online Ask Andy events that have been held, and they've been held in pretty much every part of the West Midlands, or I think there are still a few left.
Few to go.
Around in this cycle. As we said at the start, if we haven't managed to reach your question, please do email it through. I'm told that the address was put into the chat. I can't see it here. The email address that people should send their questions to, but I may be missing it. There we are. Sorry, it's just flashed up. So if you email any questions that we haven't had time to answer tonight to Andy4, that's the number 4, wm.co.uk. So Andy4wm.co.uk. They'll obviously make sure that you get a response back. Thank you again, Andy. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the evening and look forward to seeing you again as soon as we're able to. And you never know, maybe over the next month or two, whilst I'm out and about, once we're allowed. I think it's the end of this month, the stay-at-home message is lifted and we can start meeting someone else outside.
Thanks, Mike. Good night, everybody.
Thank you so much.